Now let's talk about how to calculate the elasticity of demand. So we're going to base everything off of this rather important equation, that the elasticity of demand is equal to the percentage change in quantity divided by the percentage change in price. Now, oftentimes students will get these two things mixed up. The one thing I'm told, I don't necessarily agree with this, but this might help you remember what goes on top and what goes on bottom, is if you were to rank all of the economics professors at SUU, where would price be located? At the bottom. And that might help you to understand that price goes on the denominator and quantity in the numerator. So that is what we have right there for our equation. So let's go ahead and look at an example where we start at point A, where we have a price of $10 and a quantity of 90. And let's suppose we go to point B, where now we have a quantity of 80 and a price of 20. Let's ask ourselves, what is the elasticity of demand? Okay, well, to calculate that, we're going to try to first calculate the percentage change in quantity. Okay, so the elasticity of demand is equal to the percentage change of quantity is, here's an equation, Q2 minus Q1 divided by Q1. So that tells us what's the change, which is the change in Q2 minus Q1, that's this number, divided by the starting number, which turns it into a percentage. So it looks a little nasty, but it shouldn't be too bad. It's just the change, Q2 minus Q1, divided by the starting number. And that'll be divided by the change in price, P2 minus P1, divided by the starting number. Okay, so Q2 is point B, so we get 80 minus 90 divided by our starting point, which is 90, divided by the change in price, so went from 20 to 10, divided by 10. So we can look at these individually, so this is going to be 1 divided by 9, divided by 1, which is equal to 1/9. And so therefore, the elasticity of demand is equal to 1/9 or 0.111. Now, before we get too far, one thing to note is, well, technically this should be a -1, and this should be negative 1/9, and this should be negative negative 0.111. I agree. However, the way that the textbook does it is they take the absolute value. So for the elasticity of demand, it'll always be presented as a positive number, even though it should always be negative. So just keep that in mind. So I'm going to stay consistent with the book and call the elasticity of demand as only a positive number. So therefore, we're going to take this as our elasticity of demand. And the way to interpret this is that going from point A to B, the elasticity of demand says that for a 1% increase in price, quantity will go down by 0.111%. And so because this number is less than 1, we would say that going from point A to B, we have an inelastic good. And that's one way to calculate the elasticity of demand.